Hello. Thank you everyone for tuning in to this very important topic. Unfortunately, a topic that's quite timely to the situation that we're in right now. And it's, again, a very grave topic, a very, I can't think of a more serious topic, but we will hopefully get at least some insight into the Torah Jewish way to approach it. So I'll start by saying the topic of today's class is how to allocate medical supplies when you don't have enough for everyone who's coming in front of you. The most important thing in the world is to be able to save a life. And in a typical situation, when someone comes into a hospital, the doctors and the nurses do their best to save their life using all the wonders and technology, wonders of modern medicine and technology and any resources they have in front of them. And that's, good. The problem becomes when you don't have enough resources for all the people that you're treating right now. And you're faced with the impossible question of how could you choose one person over another? We know that Jewish belief, every person has a soul, and the soul is of infinite value. And you can't have one infinity more than another infinity. You can't have, if someone has the number 50,000 is more than the number 20,000, because 50,000 is bigger and 20,000 smaller. But people can't be measured in a number, quote unquote. It's the value of each person is infinity. So you can't have one person being more or less than the other person. So when you have to choose between two lives, it's inherently an impossible. So the question, how can you possibly decide? And that's why it's such a hard question. But despite this, the Torah, which guides us throughout our entire lives, through good times and bad times, also has guidance and teachings for us in such a difficult, terrible time when you have to make this choice between one life and another life. So, and that's what we're going to try to figure out today. So, what we're going to do is we're going to basically go through different principles one by one, and then obviously, and then the question is, in every whatever particular case is happening, the person using these principles has to decide how to apply these principles. And we're not going to talk about cases that are actually happening. Instead, we're going to lay out the principles, and then, as unfortunately these cases actually happen, whoever's making the decision would have to apply these principles in order to come to the very difficult and correct decision according to the Torah. So I'll start with a bit of Talmudic logic. There is a bit of Talmudic logic that's based on, I guess that would, it's easily understandable to all of us. And the logic says, for sure is better than a doubt. Meaning, if you have a sure thing, you're better off taking it than something that's maybe. Or, and I guess in the English saying, not exactly, but it's close enough, a bird in the hand is worth two in the bush. Meaning, if you're better off with a sure thing than a maybe. And based on this, I guess you could say, simple logic, the Talmud says that if two people come before us, and one of them can be, and they both need the same medicine, and one of them can be saved by this medicine. For sure. Their lives are in danger, and they both need this one medicine that you don't have enough for both of them. If one of them will for sure have their lives saved, or in all probability, nothing is for sure, but if one of them in all probability will have their lives saved by this medicine, and the other person only has a chance of being saved by this medicine, the Talmud and the commentators and the rabbis who came after the Talmud say that you should give the medicine to the person who has a for sure chance, even if they're maybe in better health. And the truth is, because they're, in this case, they're in better health, and therefore they have a almost for sure chance of being healed by the medicine, you should give it to that person as opposed to giving it to the person that only has a chance of being healed. Because if we have it, like I said, like the logic dictates, if you have a sure thing, you should go with a sure thing over a maybe. So therefore, we have the Jewish thought teachings guide us, lead us to this very painful decision that in the case, again, where you have two people, and one of them will for sure be saved, have their lives saved by the medicine, and one of them maybe will have their lives saved by the medicine, you should give it to the person who will for sure be saved. Next, we come to a very interesting, in the old times, interesting point and an important point. Based on this idea that we said before, that there is no value, you cannot place a value on human life. Every human life is of infinite value. The Torah forbids us from doing anything that would hasten the death of a human being. You can't say, well, they're very sick anyway, so therefore, might as well move them along. That is strictly and always forbidden in the Torah. It's actually tantamount, it's considered murder, actually, to take an action to hasten a human being's death. Even if that human being is very sick and they don't have much time left and they don't have any quality of life, nevertheless, the Torah strictly forbids us from doing anything to end their life more quickly. Now, having said that, this does not mean that you have to subject very sick people to different types of treatments that probably won't work anyways, and will only, or for sure won't work anyways, and will only succeed in extending their life for a short period of time and causing them a lot of misery. So that you do not have to do. Meaning, if a person is in front of the doctor, and they're according to medical science, they're for sure going to die, and there's a procedure that's very painful that can extend their life for a short period of time, you do not have to go through that procedure according to Torah. However, to take an active action that will hasten their demise, that the Torah considers murder, actually. Just to explain this a bit more, there was one time a great rabbi, and he was dying. He was in great pain, and there was some of his friends and associates were praying to God for mercy and for healing for him. And there was a woman who prayed to God that he should die sooner, so not to be subject to the pain. And it was decided in the Talmud that this woman who prayed to God that the rabbi should die sooner, not to be subject to pain, she had done the right thing. Because you don't have to extend a person's life who's going to die anyways by a short period of time. You don't have to take active actions to extend their life if they're going through much pain. But having said that, though, it is totally forbidden to take an active action that will shorten their demise. And therefore the Talmud writes that if you have a person who's fluttering, is on the verge of death, it is forbidden to move that person's body. Why? Because the Talmud says that by moving that person's body, that could cause them to die. And that is totally, utterly forbidden. Having introduced this concept that we don't have to take every action to extend a person's life if they're going to die anyways, but we're totally forbidden to do something that will hasten the demise. Based on this teaching of the Talmud, if a person is in the hospital and they have very, very low chance of low chance of surviving, and they're on a ventilator, and there's another human being who, in all likelihood, could have their lives saved and restored with that ventilator. If by taking the ventilator away from the first person, you will be hastening that first person's demise, even though they're going to die anyways, it is totally forbidden to take the ventilator away from the first patient. Why? Even though you'll be giving it to the second patient, and it could help and it could act, and in all likelihood it could save the second patient's life. Nevertheless, it is forbidden to take the ventilator away from the first person, because that would be an act of murder. You're quickening the demise, and that the Torah, under all circumstances, prohibits. So it's forbidden to do that. But again, if they're both standing there in front of us, then we should definitely give the ventilator, and then neither of them have been put on the ventilator yet, and we only have one ventilator, it should be given to the person who is most likely to recover from their illness with the help of the ventilator. Now, let's move on to the third principle. The Talmud is a very famous Talmud, and the Talmud writes, if you and a friend or acquaintance are lost in the desert, dying of thirst, and you only have enough water for one person to keep them alive until you reach the city or the settlement where there'll be water for everyone. The Talmud asks, what should you do? Should you split the water with your friend, and thereby basically you'll help both of you in the short term, but ultimately neither of you will survive? Or should you not give the water to your friend, save the water for yourself, and leave your friend to die, but save your own life? And the Talmud discusses this, and the Talmud answers. The Talmud concludes that if a person has water, then they have to give precedence to their own life, and they have to hold on to the water and save their own life, even at the expense of their friend's life. Meaning your own life takes precedence. If you have to choose between two lives, your life and someone else's life, the Talmud writes, your own life takes precedence. That's what the Talmud writes. And it's actually forbidden, according to in all likelihood, it's even forbidden for you to say, I'll just let myself die and give the water to my friend. No, every person has a responsibility to save their own life. And the reason for this actually could be understood based on the idea that the truth is that a person is not the owner of their own life. The Torah teaches that God is the owner of all life, and God entrusts us with our life, and we have to take care of it. So when we decide, hey, I'm just going to let myself die, because it's my life, so I can do whatever I want, that's flawed logic according to Torah. According to Torah, it's not your life. It's God's life, and God is asking you to take care of it, and that is your foremost responsibility. So therefore, you have to save your own life first, because that's your first responsibility. If you can save your own life and save another human being's life, obviously it's an awesome, that's incredibly holy and awesome task and opportunity even, and you must do it. It's a sin not to, but your own life comes first. And based on this teaching of the Talmud, the commentators teach that if there's two cities suffering from a epidemic, a pandemic, and one city is suffering in much more desperate way. So city B the pandemic is raging in a much worse way than in city A. And city A has medical supplies that are life-saving, and it's going to need, it needs these supplies, but city B needs them much more. The Talmud teaches that based on the story, the teaching that we just told about the two people in the desert, there's a responsibility for the leaders of city A to preserve the life-saving medical supplies for their own city, even though another city needs it more, based on the teaching of the Talmud that you have to give precedence to your own life. And that's another principle of the Talmud, that even before we said you should give the supplies to, you have two people, you have to see who you have to decide who should you be giving the supplies to. That's a question. But in the case where you need the supplies and someone else needs the supplies, you don't have to weigh the two, who has a greater need, but instead you have to hold on to the supplies to save your own life, because you have a foremost responsibility to yourself, or in the case of a leader of a city, to that particular city. Now, obviously, if city A does not need the supplies and has more than enough supplies and will not need the supplies, so obviously it would be a terrible sin for them to withhold the supplies from city B. That would be a horrible sin to withhold life-saving supplies from city B. But if city A does need the supply, just not as much as city B, they have to hold that on to themselves, because that is their foremost responsibility to themselves, on a personal level and also on a citywide level, or a state level even, for that matter. Now, after that third principle, now we're going to go on to a fourth principle. And this is maybe even the hardest, the most difficult question. If you have two people, and they both are in equal medical conditions, meaning they both have the same chance of surviving, they both have the same risk to their lives, and they're both standing in front of you, and you don't have enough medicine for both of them. You only have enough medicine for one of them. How do you choose between two people? We started off the class by saying that every human being's life is invaluable. You cannot put a price tag on it. So, seemingly this is an impossible question. How could you decide you have two people if their medical conditions are different? So we discussed before different ways you could decide between the two of them. But if they're in the same medical condition, how could you possibly decide between two human beings? So, again, the Talmud and its commentaries answer this very difficult question. And the Talmud says, we have to look at who is of greater benefit to society. Meaning, if you have one person and they support their entire family, so they uphold the law, they're a breadwinner, they hold the law, they support their entire family. And you have another person who does not support anyone but themselves, or maybe even they're dependent upon someone else, so they don't support anyone. The Talmud writes, not the Talmud, but the Talmud, it's not only in the Talmud, but the commentators, the rabbis commenting and explaining the Talmud teach that you give precedence to the person who supports many people, because that person is of greater benefit to society. Or, if you have two human beings, and let's say they're both breadwinners, but one of them is a doctor, something that's extremely vital to society, and the other one, their profession isn't so vital to anyone, you would give precedence to the doctor. Even though, how can you judge a human life and say this is more important than that one? The Talmud says in this dire circumstance, you have to look at which human being seemingly brings more benefit to society. Now, obviously, this is a gut-wrenching decision, and it's because we know that the Torah teaches that there is no human being that has no purpose. Every human being has a purpose, and every human being has a moment to shine. But nevertheless, in this terrible circumstance, the people making the decision have to look at, on face value, who helps society more, and has to make the decision in that way. It's obviously a very painful and gut-wrenching one, but that's the guidance that the Torah gives when having to choose between two human beings who are in the same medical condition. Next, we'll touch on a bit of maybe a little, not that complicated, but just have to, it's called in Yiddish halt cup. You have to pay attention. It's a little, there's little numbers going on here. If you have 10 people with a life-threatening predicament, illness, and you only have enough full dosage of medicine for 3 of them. So the question is, what do we do? Do we divide up the dosages and, in a way, we divide up the dosages in 10 portions and give it to all 10 patients? Or do we only give 3 of the patients a proper size dosage of the medicine and thereby for sure save them? So it's explained, the rabbis say like this: if by dividing up the medicine, it's going to become that it's more likely than not that no one will survive, then instead of dividing it up, you should only give it to 3 of the 10 people and for sure save their life. Based on the principle that I said before, a for sure is better than maybe. If we divided the medicine up between all 10 people, and most likely none of them will survive, then we'll be left with no one. But if we don't divide it up and we give it to 3, then at least we can be almost assured that we'll have saved 3 lives. So that is the appropriate thing to do. However, if by dividing up the medicine into 10 portions, all 10 of people will have a good chance of surviving, just not as good a chance of surviving if they would get a full portion, then the rabbis explain that we should divide up into 10, because being that all 10 people, in this case, when you divide it up into 10, all 10 people will have a good chance of surviving, then that's the appropriate thing to do, to give all 10 of the people a good shot at surviving. So that's again another principle. Now basically, if we have to choose between a for sure and a maybe, we should give the medicine to someone who for sure will be healed. But if by dividing the medicine, both people will have a good chance of surviving, in that case, we should divide it. I want to end off by saying that there is a teaching that my father says that in the prayers in Shabbos we say, I lift up my eyes to the mountain, and from where will my help come? So that's the simple meaning of this verse that we read every week in Shul on Shabbos. But you could read this verse differently and say that the word from where could also be interpreted as from nothing. So you could read this verse and say, I lift up my eyes to the mountain, and from nothing, because and as a result of the difficult and painful situation that we're in, this will cause God to have mercy upon us and save us from the situation. And that's what we're saying. I lift up to my eyes to the mountain. I'm in a desperate situation, and from nothing, from the pain, from the suffering, this will be the impetus for the redemption and the salvation. So that's my fervent prayer that all these dilemmas and questions will not have to be addressed in the state of Ohio, and from all the suffering that we're going through in the world and in our country, in our state, in our cities. God should have mercy upon us and send us the salvation and heal us and bring us the ultimate salvation, the redemption. And we should be able to celebrate Pesach this year in Jerusalem. Very important, right now is the time to do the search for the chametz. We've had a lot of time in our house, so you're supposed to clean all the bread from your house before Pesach, and now is the time to go through your house with a flashlight or a candle, checking to make sure indeed that you have gotten rid of all the chametz. There's a special prayer that you're supposed to say when you do this search, and you can find out more details on Chabad.org. But either way, I want to wish everyone a kosher and happy and healthy Pesach.